Hello guys, welcome back to this channel, and I'm posting a new what if. Now, before you say, I've been over the place lately, not posting parts to my what ifs, but that's gonna change. The next part I want to post will be I think this is gonna be my schedule. What if Deku had the Omnitrix will be the next part, then what if Deku was Yorichiro will be and then I think I'll redo my What If Deku was Miles Morales. But let's start. You read the title. What if Deku was Lucifero's reincarnation? If you don't know who Lucifero is a demon from, basically, Lucifero is the devil king of Black Clover. And he has gravity magic. And now, this is how it's gonna be. He's not necessarily gonna be a reincarnation, but here's what's gonna happen. Some Lucifero loses in Black Clover, and he casts an ancient magic spell to reincarnate him in a different world. And when he gets reincarnated in a different world, simultaneously Deku is born. As Deku's born, the lights start to flicker, and everything starts to levitate and such, and Deku starts to cry, and then he stops crying. Now, due to this, Deku was born with greenish black hair. Because Lucifero's hair, I'm thinking it's black. I don't know. Anyway, after that, Deku goes on his life. Now, Deku is still confirmed to be quirkless, and Deku's still confirmed to be quirkless. But in this version, whenever Bakugo picks on him, Deku fights back because for some reason he just has this sense of superiority, and he hates it. Because we all know Deku's like a nice person, but Dante's the Demon King has a sense of superiority. But sometimes Deku does think it, Bakugo, sort of like a Naruto thing. So, anyway, uh, anyway, it happens when Deku's 8. One day, Bakugo and some kids start throwing stuff at Deku because, Deku, made fun of one of them in class. Not made fun of them, but one of the kids made fun of Deku, and Deku replied with a joke, and, they started throwing stuff at him. And Deku, as they're about to throw, a giant, a computer, like their teacher's computer. And Deku says, "Stop," as he screams it out, as he puts his, hands in front of his face. And then all of a sudden, the computer stops. And it's the computer is levitating. And it's like, how is the computer levitating? And Deku, for some reason, Deku feels like he's not even controlling his hands. And then all of a sudden, Deku throws a computer at one of the kids. I'm gonna say it's that one kid with wings, the chubby kid with wings. Afterwards, Deku lifts up 2 desks and throws them. And Deku tries to lift up the teacher's desk, but Deku's weak body isn't working. And Deku then stops. And no one notices besides Bakugo, but when Deku stopped using this gravity power, when Deku was using this gravity power, his hair started turning more and more black, But then when Deku stopped using these gravity powers, his hair turned green again, and Bakugo was the only one who noticed this. Now, Deku would be taken to the office where he would be, pointed out as the victim, even though he did go a little too far. And they'd go to the doctor, and the doctor would search Deku's quirk. Now, it's still going to be no spoilers in case you haven't read the manga, but it's still going to be the doctor, and, now, it's still going to be the doctor, and the doctor would say, I checked this boy 4 years ago. He doesn't have a quirk. How is that possible? And Deku would say, I have a quirk, I have a quirk. As he'd say, yes, you have a quirk. And the doctor would say, apparently you can control gravity. You can control and manipulate it. As Doctor would say, now we just have to name it. And while Deku was thinking of names like maybe, you know, super telekinesis, and the doctors would be like, okay, and all of a sudden Deku would hear a voice in his head as he'd say gravity magic. Deku would say, no, can I name it gravity magic? And the doctor would say gravity magic. I mean, sure. You might want to change it later in the future though, because that magic part doesn't sound that good. Deku would say yeah, and Deku would train for a little, and he'd find it was kind of hard for him to like control the gravity, and he was wondering why like he couldn't control it as normal, and he was just kind of weird because it was like he controlled it so good that one time, but he didn't feel like he was in control of his body. After this, Deku would continue to train, and Deku would get good enough to just Deku thought all he could do was levitate objects, so he never really took extra time in training. He never tried to fly or try to crush things. He just thought it was like a telekinesis. Anyway, afterwards, I just thought of something. You know that old guy from Naruto, the one Kage, the Earth Kage or something? Technically he had gravity powers too. Super weighted boulder and light weighted boulder. Anyway, we then skip to the original, and Deku, he's not the skinny person you know from before. Because Deku trains a little. He's not that buff, but he's I'm saying he has the same build as he has like the same it's like he has a build in the middle of Kaminari and Kirishima at this point. That's what his build is like. And just like in the original, the teacher asks them who wants to go to UA, and Bako says he wants to go to UA, and the teacher's like, Deku wants to go to UA too. Now, people think Deku could have a chance of getting into UA, and just like in the original, Bako slams his hand on his desk. Now, after class, Bako's like, you want to go to UA? I'm not gonna lie, your quirk is pretty strong, and I don't know how you got it. You just awaken it randomly, even though you were pronounced quirkless. Something doesn't seem right. As Bako would walk away. Anyway, after that, Deku would go home, and as he'd go home, he started to go under an underpass where the sludge villain would attack him, and Deku would squirm around, and Deku would use Deku would levitate his phone over to him. Deku would levitate his phone. Deku would like levitate his phone over to him, and he would try to call 911, but the Slytherin would knock it out of his hands. Now, in this version, All Might would have actually ended up doing some extra hero work in the beginning for some random reason, so he had actually had to take a small break in the sewers, so it was like a 2-minute break. Meanwhile, Deku was fading to unconsciousness as Deku would wake up in a dark area, sort of like the thing you see in the background here. And Deku would see this like image of Lucifero, and Deku would be so scared. He'd be like, "What happened? Am I dead? Did I go to the underworld? Where am I?" And Lucifero would be like, "Calm down. You're inside our body." As Deku would say, "Our body?" And Lucifero would say, "Yes. Well, it's mainly your body. I just inhabited it when you were born." As Deku would say, "Who are you?" And Lucifero would say, "My name's Lucifero. I was the Demon King." And Deku would say, "Demons don't exist." And Lucifero would say, "You're talking to one, kid." Deku would say, "But what is this about you inhabiting my body? What are you?" And Lucifero would explain about everything he did in Black Clover, and he'd explain how he ended up in Deku's body, and how Deku's been using his gravity magic, and Deku was just a good suitor. Lucifero could have left Deku, but he's grown attached to Deku, because again, Lucifero is a spirit, so he can just jump from body to body. But he decided to stay with Deku. And since they're not bound by a devil contract like in Black Clover, they can stay. And Deku would say, like, wow, I never knew. So I am still quirkless. And Lucifer would say, yes. And Deku would say, hmm. Deku would say, so what do you want from me? Why me? Lucifer would say, at first it was just to survive, but I've grown attached to you. Lucifer would say, I want you to do one thing. I want you to get strong, and then we'll perform the devil binding ritual, and we'll be equals, he'd say. Because I've realized my bad ways, and I want to help people now instead of ruining their lives. Lucifero would say, and Deku would say, okay. And then Deku would blink and open his eyes again as he just see green sludge everywhere. And Deku's hair would be longer and more black, but his hair would start to revert back to like a short stage, and it'd be more green than black. And Deku would be like, whoa. And Deku would notice he was floating. And Deku would be like, whoa. As All Might would be there. And Deku would be like, oh my god, it's All Might. As he'd fall down. Now, just like in the original, All Might would give Deku an autograph and a picture. And Deku would say, wait, I have a question. And he'd try to jump onto All Might. But then he'd pause and think, wait a minute. Technically, what Lucifero said, and Deku would look before All Might would have jumped away. With this, Deku would decide to train more and more. Now, Lucifero would say he wasn't in the mood to like train Deku or whatever, and Deku had to get stronger on his own. It was already more than enough that Lucifero was letting Deku use his own powers and magic, so Deku had to learn some stuff on his own. So Deku would like train for 5 months at a Kono Beach, moving heavier objects and just working out on his body and getting fit. Because remember, Deku was already sort of like how he was after 10 months training with All Might. So now Deku's a little bit more buffer than he was in the beginning of the anime, just a little bit more, you know. So, like around 6 months, Deku would be training hard. As Lucifero would say, "Kid, I'm kind of bored, so I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna help you. Try to fly." Like Lucifero would say, and Deku would say, try to fly. Lucifero would say, you have to focus on your gravity. You can't be too heavy or too light, and you have to know how to move around you. And Deku would try and try as he'd end up being able to float. Now, after 6 months of training, Deku wouldn't really be able to fly, but he'd more be able to, like, float. Steven Universe float, or, like, how he has float in the manga. Just kidding. Ha 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 ha. He doesn't have float in the manga. No spoilers here. Anyway, after that, actually, like, float like Nana Shimura could float. Anyway, after that, Deku would still need some training, but he'd be good. He'd be good to go. So we start, and Deku goes to your entrance exam, and just like in the original, Bakugo slaps him on the back of the head and tells him to move aside, because Deku never saved Bakugo. Afterwards, Deku decides to, like, keep going forward, and he trips, but he catches himself, you know, and, Deku stands up straight, and Uraraka's like, how did you do that? And Deku's like, oh, I just used my quirk. And Uraraka's like, no, I used my quirk on you, but yet you just overrid it? And Deku's like, wait, you used your quirk on me? And Deku would say, what do you mean? I feel normal. Uraraka would say, my quirk is zero gravity. She would explain it how she can make anything weightless by touching it, and she can only release it if she touches her fingers. But yet he just, like, overrid it. And Deku thinks, oh, that must be because of my quirk. My quirk is gravity. I can control my own gravity, so maybe I can just override your quirk because I can just control my own gravity, you know? And he'd say, I guess that makes sense. And they'd introduce each other, and Deku would start being shy again. And they'd walk in, and the same thing would happen with President Mike, and the match would start. And Deku would be thinking too much on the entire points and stuff, and Lucifero would say that everybody's getting ahead of him, and Deku would realize that and go. Now, Deku would see how Deku would destroy these robots is Deku would see them, and Deku would just see robots, he'd pick them up and smash them into other robots, compressing them into like balls and throwing them at other robots, and that's how he just keep doing this. And upon doing that, especially since he could use scrap metal, Deku did have a weight limit because he was still technically sort of human, and only Lucifero can use his power to the fullest. Now, Deku would then continue, and he'd get about 53 points until the 8-minute mark would arrive, and the 0-point warp would come up, and Deku would decide to just ignore it before he'd see Uraraka. Now Deku would like rush over to Uraraka, and he'd lift up the robot, but the 0-point robot would be there, and all of us Deku would close his eyes as he put his hand on top of him, and then all of a sudden, like, Deku would feel power, and then Deku would manage to tip the 0-point robot over because he had created some sort of shield using gravity or something, and Deku would awaken as he'd realize something. Deku would awake, and he would have horns, and his forehead would be darker, and his hands, his fingertips, his fingers, not his palms, but his fingers would be dark and stuff. And Deku would look at himself, and he'd have small wings too. And Deku would be like, "What the heck?" And Deku would realize Uraraka, and he'd run over to Uraraka, or more like he was right by her, and he'd pick her up, and he'd jump her over to Recovery Girl as Deku's horns would go in. And Recovery Girl would say that she was gonna be okay, and Deku would go home. And while walking home, Deku would wonder what that was, and Lucifer would be like, "That's my demon power. You just used 10% of it." And Deku would be like, "What's demon power?" And that's where I'm gonna end this video off. Tell me if you want part 2, because honestly, I've actually tried to do this what if 4 different times on different occasions, but it just never worked. Mainly because I had always had Lucifero come in while Deku was being attacked by the Sludge. But if you don't want part 2, say it. If you want it, say it. Honestly, this actually troubling what if that has troubled me for some time. But I hope you enjoy it. Now, what I said about posting 5 times a week, that's a lie. I'm gonna try to post at least 3 times a week. That's a good thing. Enjoy.